All right, tonight we begin a new study of the book of Job that's going to carry us through this trimester, will carry us through Job and the first 42 Psalms. We're going to then look, we'll look at the book of Job. That's not going to take up the whole trimester. And so because of the nature of the book and the cycle of the speeches, we're going to cover it in larger sections than taking it a chapter at a time. And so, as always, we want to give some introductory information. We're going to look at chapters 1 to 5, and hopefully we'll get that covered here in just a moment. But as always, I think introductory information is helpful. The book of Job is referenced in the New Testament. Very little information in the New Testament. It's quoted only once. 1 Corinthians 3 quotes from Job 5. And there's only the one line, and that's the only time it's quoted. Job is mentioned only once. Remember the patience of Job. And that's not even a quotation, but just a reference. And that's all we have in the New Testament about Job. Job is a book that sets in the wisdom literature, as you know. And by that we simply mean that the wisdom literature, these books of poetry, our wisdom literature, deal with practical daily living. And consequently, that's why we call them the wisdom literature. It's not that other books are not dealing with wisdom. They are. We learn wisdom from many of the books of the Bible. But why do we call them wisdom? Well, because it deals with practical daily living. We see that in the Psalms. We see it in Proverbs, Song of Solomon. We see it here in Ecclesiastes. And we also see it here in this book of Job. Because it deals with some fundamental questions. It's a book of poetry. If you have the American Standard or the New King James, perhaps some others, it's set off as poetry, just the arrangement of the text. Beginning in chapter 3, now you don't see that in the first two chapters, but beginning in chapter 3 through chapter 42, it's arranged in poetic form. However, this is Hebrew poetry, and Hebrew poetry differs from our Western poetry. You say this is poetry, so I don't see the rhyme and I don't see the rhythm with reference to that. Well, that's our Western poetry. This is Hebrew poetry. And we'll see some samples of that as we go along. But there may be sections wherein there is a statement made and the same thing is stated differently and then may be stated differently. That's part of the nature of Hebrew poetry. Sometimes there's a statement made and the opposite thing is mentioned. That's the nature of Hebrew poetry. We'll see more about that particularly in the Psalms. The style is that this is not a verbatim report of the conversation. So what exact words did Job use? We're not told. And it's much like writing a song about some event and you write it to fit the poetry and it's not necessarily an exact quotation. Part of the style is that there are cycles of speeches. 60% of the book is involved in these cycles of speeches. So after we get through with Job's declaration in chapter 3, we're going to see in a moment, we start the cycles of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar with Job intermingled in with them. So they will speak and then Job responds, and another one will speak and then Job responds, and then they'll speak and then Job responds. And then here we go again in a second cycle, and then in a third cycle. And that's the bulk of the book. What about the date of the book? Well, that's always important. Except when God doesn't give us any information about the date much. So there's two dates that we want to focus on, and one is the date of the man Job. Where did he fit in time? And to be exact, we don't know. But it seems that he fits in the patriarchal period. We'll give more evidence of that here in just a moment. He very well may have been contemporary with Abraham or Abraham's time. So he seems to be in the patriarchal period. And so I'm going to footnote here. This is one of the reasons why when people say, I want to study the Bible in true chronology. Well, I would too. Have at it. When you get through arranging it, I want to see it. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take the book of Job and put it over here around Genesis 12 or so. And so we're going to study Genesis 1 to 12. And then somewhere we got to insert Job in there. And then we got to finish Genesis. And you say, well, that's confusing. That's my point. The Bible is not written in true chronology. But that's probably where he had fit. The date of the book is another date we need to talk about. When was it written? Not just the events, but when was it written? We don't know. Some think it's possibly by the time of Moses, later than his own time. And some think maybe Moses was the author. Who was the author? It's assumed it was Job, but that seems unlikely because in the book he never finds out the role of Satan that we see. Tradition says it was Moses. And so is there any can we supply of that? Well, other than tradition, we don't know that Moses was the author. Some think it was an anonymous writer. Perhaps one of the friends wrote the book. And we just really don't know who the author is. Well, let's talk about the setting. It was in the land of Uz. Verse 1 said there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And so Uz is the place where this takes place. That's between Palestine and Arabia. It extended from Edom to the Euphrates. It was near desert, according to chapter 1, northeast of Palestine. Uz is circled there. And right about where my arrow is would be the Bible lands or Palestine or the land of Canaan. And Uz was just a little ways from that. And that's where he was. It probably fits in this patriarchal period. And so what evidence do we have that he fits in the time of Abraham? And one is the lack of reference to the covenant of Moses, the lack of reference to the Mosaic system, the lack of reference to the temple or the tabernacle, all of which was an outgrowth of the Mosaic period. And the family altar in chapter 1, where he's offering a sacrifice as a seeming patriarch on behalf of the others. The long life, he seemed to live long. That fit with the patriarchal period. Job is not an Israelite name. So you combine all of that evidence together, that's fairly strong evidence. I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's fairly strong evidence that he fit into the patriarchal period. And so we think that he fit there in that time of Abraham. Now, we need to think about Job's friends. In chapter 2, we're introduced to the friends that came, and they were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And here's something we need to understand at the beginning, that on just a cursory reading of this, we may think, Job had some friends and they were bad guys. These were righteous men. These are men who appealed to him and they appealed to God. And most of what they say is good Bible doctrine. They were just wrong in their application. Let's take Eliphaz, for example. Eliphaz says, you reap what you sow. Is that good Bible doctrine? Well, yeah, that's good Bible doctrine. That's true. The Bible teaches you reap what you sow. You sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. But what he does is he takes this Bible principle, a God-given principle, and makes the wrong application of that by simply stating to Job, Job, you're suffering, so that means you had to do something wrong in order to, because you reap what you sow. Could we teach we reap what we sow? Well, sure. Well, then every time somebody has problems in their life, tragedy strikes, a tornado destroys their house, a fire burns their house, they have a car wreck, a loved one dies, you say, well, you must have done something wrong because you reap what you sow, They were good, righteous people. They just were wrong in what they said. They made an appeal for Job to repent. Now, the question is, why do the righteous suffer? Job's friends had this idea that Job sinned, and that's why he did suffer as he did. But one thing we learn from the book, if we don't get anything else, is they were absolutely wrong about that. They were absolutely wrong about that. That's not why Job was suffering. Not everything in the book is true. For example, even in the New Testament, Satan is quoted. That is an accurate quotation from Satan, but Satan was wrong. Does that make sense? So Eliphaz is going to be wrong. Job's going to be wrong about some things. And so was Zophar. And Bildad was wrong. And so these are men that would say things that were not true, that were not correct, they were not accurate. But it is an accurate reporting of that. Does that make sense? So is this true? Well, it's an accurate report, but they were incorrect in their information that they were disseminating. And so we need to remember that as we go along. Now, Job doesn't see why God allowed all this. I don't know about you, but in my first reading many years ago, when my first real serious study of Job, I was trying to seriously study it and get my mind around Job. As I was getting started on that, and I was about 4 or 5 chapters in, I remember asking some other preachers about what about Job? Did he do wrong? What did God say to him? I haven't got that far yet. And I remember asking questions about at what point does Job ever see what goes on? And I was kind of disappointed. Job never found out. Job never finds that out. Now, what's interesting about that there's much that the book leaves unsettled. You've seen these quotes before, but these capture the thought. Edersheim said, we cannot understand the meaning of many trials. God did not explain them. To explain them would destroy its object, which is that of calling for a simple faith and implicit obedience. If we knew why the Lord sent us this or that trial, it would thereby cease to be trial either of faith or of patience. He's right about that. J. Sidel Baxter said this. He said, the fact is Job was not meant to know the explanation of his trial. On that simple fact, everything hangs. If Job had known, there would have been no place for faith. And that man would never have come forth as gold purified by fire. We are meant to understand that there are some things God cannot reveal to us at the present, inasmuch as the very revealing of them would thwart His purpose for our good. The Scriptures are as wise in their reservation as in their revelations. Enough is revealed to make faith intelligent. Enough is reserved to give faith scope for its development. In this, we repeat, lies the message of the book. There was an explanation, but Job did not know it and was not meant to know that. The same thing's true in your life. There may be something going on and you wonder why. If God explained to you why and what He was doing, you wouldn't have a need for faith, would you? And so there are things you're not meant to know. There were things Job was not meant to know. And that's part of that was disappointing to me in my first real study of the book, that I'm thinking, I miss him. When did Job learn what went on? He didn't learn what went on. He never saw the picture we see. And that's part of the beauty of the book. Now, I want to remind you of this, that God is not on trial in the book. The question is not, where is God when Job is hurting? The question is, where is Job when Job is hurting? We put God on trial sometimes. Where's God in the midst of my problems? I'm suffering. I've lost loved ones. I've financially ruined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And where's God in all of that? The question isn't where is God. The question is, where are you when you're suffering? Well, enough of the introduction. Let's talk about the book itself. Now, this is the outline of the book. Now, I know I've been running through this, and this is going to be conducted as a class interaction. We've been doing lecture style and the prophets, but this is going to be more class format. But usually my introductions are pretty much introductions. It's what they are. 3 sections to the book. There's the prologue, the dialogue, and the epilogue. The testing of Job, we're going to get through. And then there's the dialogue. We're going to see tonight Job's lamentation. And then the cycle of speeches start. There's the first, second, and third. Then there's an interlude, Job's final declaration. Elihu comes along, and then God and Job. And then there's the outcome, the verdict. God finally speaks. And we want to know what the truth is. We learn that when God opens His mouth and He begins to speak. So let's get underway now. Here's Job 1 and 2. Let's get a question or two out of the way, and then we'll roll into chapter 2. Lists Job's riches mentioned in chapter 1.
7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and many servants.
All right. Very wealthy man. Very wealthy man. We'll come back to that. Question number 2, who are the sons of God? Chapter 1 and verse 6. Say again. All right. They were angels. The Septuagint so translates that. Say more about that in a moment. Let's get question number 3. What was the charge that Satan made about Job? Absolutely. And you take those away and he's going to turn away from you. So let's work through this now. Verses 1 to 5. We're wanting to get the bigger picture here, and so we're not going to get bogged down on every detail. That would be interesting. I would love to do that, but we don't have the time and get through our book. So let's look at verses 1 to 5. Job was a faithful man. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and he was blameless and upright and feared God and shunned evil. The idea of shunning evil means he turned from evil. It doesn't mean he never did wrong. I like that phrase because what that says is Job did wrong sometimes, but he turned from it. It's in contrast to continuing in sin. And hopefully that describes every one of us. Do you sin? Sure you do. Do you ever say something you shouldn't say or do something you shouldn't do? Sure, but shun it. Turn away from it. And Job was that kind of man. He was well blessed with 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he had all these possessions of 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. And this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And so he was a mega wealthy kind of person. Now, verse 4 and 5 talks about the children would be together, and then he would offer a sacrifice on their behalf. And what would he say as he's making his sacrifice on their behalf? Yeah, it may be that they have sinned, and so he's interested in his family. He's interested in their righteousness. He's interested in their welfare. He cares about them. Verses 1 to 5 said he was a faithful man and he was very prosperous. In fact, at this point, we could close the book up, and Job's got it better than he's ever had it, and he's got it better than any of us could ever dream of having. Man, things are great with Job. All right? Now then, here's his first test, the loss of his property and his children. So now verse 6 says, there came a time when the sons of God, that's probably angels, that's referred to, of the heavenly host. The Septuagint uses the term angels there, who came to give their account before God, and Satan came among them. Seems to be an intruder at this point. And we don't have time to develop this thought, but I think most would agree that Satan probably is a fallen angel himself and knows something about angelic behavior. And the Lord said to Satan that, where do you come from? I don't think the Lord's inquiring, I'm not sure who you are. And where. The Lord knows where you come from. What he's asking is, state your business. What are you doing here? And what was his answer? All right. Coming to and fro on the earth, walking down. And what does that remind you of as far as a phrase in the New Testament? Say again? Yeah. Roaring, that Satan is a roaring lion walking about, seeking whom he may devour. That's what he's saying here. I'm walking in and around the earth. In other words, I'm looking to see who I may devour. That's his job. That's what he does. I'm looking to see who I can capture under my influence. Now, who introduces Job to this discussion? God does. That's interesting to me. It's not that Satan said, I've got my eye on your servant Job. Let's talk about him. It was God who challenged him with Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, blameless and upright, one who fears God and shuns evil. You looking for somebody to devour? Have you targeted my servant Job? And so what does Satan say? We just mentioned that a moment ago, but let's get this in our mind. What's Satan's argument now? Yeah. I think Diane's right that he is saying, yeah, I have looked at Job, and I'll tell you about Job. He's only serving you because you blessed him so, and you take those blessings away, and he'll curse you. He'll turn his back on you. So God says, what did God say to him?
He's in your hand, just do not harm him.
Yeah, stretch out your hand and touch all he has. And in other words, behold, all that he has is in your power, but do not lay hands on his person. And then Satan went forth. All right, now here's what happens. Beginning at verse 13. A messenger comes, and what does he say? All right, you lost your oxen and your donkeys. The Sabaeans took and raided them and killed them, and they're gone. And notice the phrase of verse 16, while he was still speaking. You're talking about when it rains, it pours. And we often talk about how things come in threes. Something happens, and then before that's through, something else happens. Before that through, something else happens. And you just get whammed and whammed again and whammed again. And so while he was still speaking, another messenger comes, and what does he say? Lost your sheep and your servants with a fire, perhaps lightning. Others suggest that maybe there was raining of fire from heaven. I'm not sure which, doesn't matter. But fire came from God and from heaven and devoured the sheep. While he was speaking, a third one came. What'd he say? Camels have been stolen and killed your servants. I mean, Job's losing everything. He's losing all of this wealth that he had. He's suddenly devastating. He's got nothing. But at least he's still got his family. But while he was still speaking, here comes another messenger. And what does he say? Yeah, your sons and your daughters were all together eating and drinking, and a great wind came and destroyed that. And so here were 4 messengers. 2 of these calamities were at the hand of wicked men, and 2 were natural calamities. Now, Job's reaction, verse 20. Yes, here are our expressions of grief. Number 1, he tore his clothes. Secondly, he shaved his head. Thirdly, he fell to the ground and he worshiped. Let me footnote here to say, what's interesting about Job is that when tragedy struck, Job didn't turn away from God and say, I just can't think about going to worship, can't think about worshiping God, I can't think about God right now, I'm too devastated. That's what he did at first. What did he say? Verse 21. Didn't have anything when I got here, and don't have anything now, and that's the way I'm going to go. So, blessed be the name of the Lord. And in none of that did Job, he didn't charge God with wrong. In other words, he didn't blame God. How often do you hear somebody say something happened and they blame God? They lose a loved one, they blame God. They lose a child, they blame God. They lose their parents, they blame God. They lose their job, they blame God. Job didn't do that. All right, that's his first test. Job's lost everything he had, and now let's go to chapter 2. Here's the second test. Another time, the sons of God came before him, and Satan presented himself, and the Lord asked the same question. Who brought up Job this time? God again. Have you considered my servant Job? And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? I'm reading it, verse 3. There's none like him. One who fears God and shuns evil, etc. And still he holds fast to his integrity, though you incited me against him to destroy him without a cause. I think verse 3 is telling us that God allowed Satan to destroy him. You incited me is the idea. There are things God allows that he doesn't cause. Does that make sense? He allows Satan to tempt us, but God doesn't tempt us. And so he allows some things that he doesn't cause. He allowed Satan to do that. And then Satan said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has will he give for his life. What in the world does that mean? Skin for skin. Absolutely. Yeah, what he's saying, it's a proverb, really, that you give skin to save your skin. In other words, you give limb to save your life. And in other words, his argument basically, Satan's argument is this. Oh, okay, yeah, Job's still serving you, right? But all we did was take away his family and his possession. We haven't bothered Job. If Job himself is touched, if he suffers himself, he's going to curse you. He's going to turn his back on you. Surely he will curse you to his face. And what did the Lord say? Yeah, just don't kill him. He's in your hand. So Satan went out and struck him with painful boils from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. And what's the picture of Job at verse 8? Say again. Yeah, sitting in an ash heap, taking this broken piece of pottery, scraping his sores and his skin. Now then his wife comes along, and what does his wife say? Curse God and die. Question number 5. What's she trying to get him to do? Yeah. Say goodbye to God. Sat through a lecture once listening to Phil Roberts' lecture on excellent material on the book of Job, and he had told about hearing Merle Tenney. Some of you have Tenney's works. He heard Merle Tenney's lecture on the book of Job, and he listed all of Job's problems. He lost his camels, he lost his oxen, he lost his sheep, he lost his sons, he lost his daughters, and he kept his wife. And he said that with tongue in cheek, but that was part of his problem too, wasn't it? Because she's no encouragement to him. She tells him, you're suffering, and what you need to do is just curse God or tell God bye, and your problems may be over. But now, before we get too hard on her, was she right in what she said? No. But neither was Eliphaz, Bildad, or Zophar, or Job, for that matter. Let's not forget, she lost her possessions too. She lost her children too. She's hurting too. And Job's going to tell us later, sometimes when you hurt, you say things you don't mean. We'll see that a little bit later. And she's watching her husband suffer as well. All right. Now, let's talk about this sudden loss of health. We'll come back to this in just a moment. But let's talk about this problem that he had. He's broke out with boils. And we'll see this slide a little bit later. So if you're trying to copy everything down, you won't get it all. But we'll see this throughout the series. He had boils. There was itching. Whatever this was that he had. There's a drastic change in his appearance because they didn't recognize him at first. He had difficulty eating. There were running sores and had worms. He had nightmares. He had shortness of breath, darkness of the eyes, odorous breath, loss of weight. There was pain, blackened skin and peeling. He had fever. And chapter 7 and chapter 29 said this lasted for months. This wasn't a week or 2 weeks or a month. This lasted for months. Job has serious health problems. Now, let's talk about verses 11 to 13. Job's friends come. Their names again? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Some time has passed. Perhaps months have passed. And I say that because verse 12 said they didn't recognize him at first. When a person gets sick and you come immediately, they probably haven't changed much. But over a period of weeks and days and months, they may change. And he had changed a great deal. Now, what did they do? Let's look at verse 11. At the end of verse 11, what did they come to do? To mourn with him and to comfort him. They've heard Job's lost his possessions. He's lost his children. And they sat down with him. But notice at verse 12, they raised their eyes and they didn't recognize him. And they lifted up their eyes, their voices, and they wept. And they tore their robe and sprinkled dust and etc. Now, verse 13, this is a key point. They sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And what else did they not do? Say again? They didn't say a word to him. You might have a marginal note, as I do. This was the best thing they did in the entire book.
And you know, Johnny, sometimes just being there is better than saying something, because what could you say? You couldn't change the situation,
Absolutely.
but just being there.
Especially if we try to explain the circumstance. If this was the best work they did, and we're going to learn some practical things in the book, and this is one of them. When somebody's suffering and you go and you say, I don't know what to say, you don't have to say a thing. Just be there. Go to the funeral home, you're there. Go to their house and just be there. They're suffering, and maybe it's the loss of a loved one that was unexpected, a premature death. And you say, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything. And that may be your best work. When we go to explain, well, it probably happened because, that's when we're going to mess up. Just be there. That was the best work they ever did. Now, because they saw his grief was great. Now let's go to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, we have Job's lamentation. Basically, in a nutshell, in one sentence, what did Job say in this declaration? In fact, we'll come back to that. Go ahead. Yeah. That he just wished that he had never been born, wished he could die now, wished he had died at birth, etc. That he wished he could just fly away and be at rest. We're going to get through that here in just a second. So let's go to question 6 while we're talking about that. Was his attitude wrong? Yeah, it was. We're going to see that later in the book. Okay, all right. Yeah, his attitude's wrong, and God's going to rebuke him later for that. And we'll see more about that as we go along. Let's just get his picture now. So let's get the order. 3 things he said. Basically, verses 1 through 10, he said, I wished I'd never been born. I've never been that low, but I know some people that have been that low, and I've had friends that gets that low that they would say, basically, I wished I'd never been born. And notice what he says. That after Job opened his mouth, he cursed the day of his birth. And notice, let's follow the outline here. Verses 1 to 6, he said he curses the day of the birth. Verse 3 says, may the day perish in which I was born. I wish that day never existed. Look at verse 4 beginning. That may the day be darkness, and may God above not seek it. I wish the light had not even shined on that day. I wish that day had never existed, the day I was born. This is interesting. Verse 6b, that may it not come to the number of months. In other words, our way of wording that, I wished it wasn't on the calendar. I wish that my birthday was not on the calendar. And so he curses the day of his birth. Verse 7, he wishes his mother was barren. Oh, that the night be barren. Look at verse 10. Verse 10. Because it did not shut up the doors of my mother's womb. In other words, I wished I'd never been born. I wish my mother had been barren. I wish my birthday was taken off the calendar. Wished night had not even shined. Wish that day didn't exist. So I wished I had never been born. But I was born. So in that I was born, I wish what? Verses 11 to 19. I wished I'd have died at birth. Look at verse 11. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me, or the breast that I should nurse? Well, I wished I'd have been stillborn. That's what I wish. Look at verse 13 through 19. That he wishes he could be, that he would be better off dead where all are equal. Now, by that we simply mean, look at verse 19. This kind of captures the thought. The small and the great are there, and the servant is free from his master. In other words, in the grave, the servant and the master are equal. The one that is small and the one that is great are equal. The prisoner and those who keep them in prison are equal. I wished I could just be in the grave where all would be equal. So I wished I'd never been born, but in that I was born, I wished I was still born. But that didn't happen. So since that didn't happen, what does he wish? 20 to 26. I wish I could die now. So notice at verse 20. Why is light given to him who is in misery? A life to the bitter of the soul, who long for death. I wished I could die now, in other words. I wished I could do that. So he longs for death, 20 and 21. And then at verse 23 to 26, he talks about how his suffering is great. His sighing comes before I eat, and my groanings pour out like water. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest. It troubles me. In other words, I'm moaning and I'm groaning and I'm suffering and I'm sitting in the ash heap, scraping my itchy skin, and I just wished I could die now. So was Job's attitude right? No, he's not right. But Job's going to say later, you say things when you suffer that you don't mean. But his friends take him quite serious, and we're going to see that. All right, questions or comments on chapters 1 to 3 before we go to 4 and 5?
He must have had some confidence and felt that Job was more capable of handling this than anyone else he could point out. If you were a strong Christian, you don't pick the weakest sheep. You pick the one that you know is strong. And God allowed us to do this with Job.
God must have been confident that indeed this is how it was going to turn out. Have you considered my servant Job? You're looking for somebody you want to target? Try to target him. And he did.
Makes me think of the verse, he doesn't put more on you than you can bear.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Question number, I've lost it now. Let's see. Question number 7. Summarize the speech Eliphaz gave, chapters 4 and 5. One phrase, one sentence. How can you summarize it? Reap what you sow. That's his speech, basically. So here we have Eliphaz's response to this declaration or lamentation of chapter 3. So Eliphaz feels like he needs to say something, and he does. Now, basically, and I'm going to try to do this each time with each one of these speeches they make, and kind of put up here in a little blurb at the top a summary of his speech. What is he saying? What's the basic, in one sentence, summary? And his summary is, Job, you reap what you sow. So he starts on the note, you're a good man. What does he say in verses 1 to 6 about how good he is?
Used to encourage people when they were down and lift them up.
Yeah, you've strengthened people and you've helped people, and is not your reverence, your confidence, and your integrity your hope? In other words, Job, you are a good man. But. Verse 7, remember how now whoever perished being innocent. Well, has that ever happened? Well, sure it has. But he's assuming that never happens. So no one ever perishes, no one ever suffers who is innocent. So therefore I know you're guilty. That's what he's saying. Now verse 8 is a key verse. We'll try to zero in on key verses that tell us the point. Verse 8, even as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. In other words, you reap what you sow. You're reaping trouble. That means you sowed some trouble. You reap what you sow. That means you sinned. I don't know what you did, but you did something. That's why you're suffering, Job. You reap what you sow. And this doesn't happen to the innocent. So you're guilty. It's interesting they never charged Job specifically saying, Job, you committed this sin. This is what it is. They just said, you did something wrong. You need to fess up. That's what you did. All right. Now he says, man is not righteous before God. Beginning at verse 12. What's interesting, I wish we had time to talk about the lion and the cubs and the old lion. Haley makes the observation that there are 5 stages of the development of the lion that are alluded to here, and that finally they reach the point that he's old and then he's gone and he perishes. And that implies that Job and his family are perishing because of their sin. So why did your children die? Because you sinned. And you're perishing too. You're wasting away because of your sin. Now beginning at verse 12, his point here is that man is not righteous before God. He appeals to something as evidence. This is what happened to me. What did he say? I had a dream, I had a vision. And in this vision, I heard a voice that said, before he talks about what he said, he talks about this vision that there were things he couldn't clearly see or clearly hear. There was a whisper. But, he said that caused him to fear. And I think his point is this, that if that which I couldn't clearly see and clearly hear caused me to fear, how much more so to appear before God. And the voice said, can a mortal be more righteous than God? Job, if you're claiming you're innocent, you're claiming to be more righteous than God. Man is not righteous before God. Well, what Eliphaz fails to recognize is that principle, if that's true, that means man is not more righteous than God, therefore you're a sinner. That same thing would apply to Eliphaz. Yeah. That makes him a sinner. So Eliphaz, what'd you do wrong? All right. Now that gets us through verse 21. Let's go to chapter 5. Verses 1 to 7, what's his point? By the way, Eliphaz is quite insensitive. Yeah, you need to repent. And he says, but there is no help. There is no help going to come for a foolish man. He basically calls him a foolish man. Look at verse 2. For wrath kills a foolish man. And here's what happens to a foolish man. His sons are far from safety. That's a reference to Job's children. In other words, what if your children just got killed in an accident and somebody comes to you and says, you know what, you're a foolish person And I tell you what happens to foolish people. Their children are not safe. They're liable to be killed. How insensitive. That's what he's saying. And the hungry eat up his harvest. That's what the Sabaeans did. Job, someone, I forgot who that was, I believe it was Phil Roberts that made the observation that it's like Job's friends hold up a mirror and say, Job, you want to know what a sinner looks like? This is what a sinner looks like. Does that look like you? You're a sinner. They described Job and said, that's what a sinner is like. You know, his children die, people steal from him, and that's what a sinner is. So you had to do wrong. Let's go further in chapter 5. This is interesting at verse 6. For affliction does not come from dust, nor does trouble spring up from the ground. Trouble doesn't pop up from the ground. In other words, trouble doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. That a man's born to trouble. Man is, because he sins, is going to have trouble, and and that's exactly what happened to you. So now beginning at verse 8, and nearly every one of the speeches will end with an appeal to repent. These are good men. They want what's best for Job. They're just wrong in their application of this. And so he tells him to commit his case to God. And verses 9 to 16 talks about how God is great, how great God is. But look at verse 17. Behold, happy is the man whom God corrects. Therefore do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. Job, don't be upset at God. He's just chastening you, trying to bring you to repentance. That's all he's doing. Now then, he finally ends this section. And that if you turn back to God, you're going to be blessed. I got to call attention before we run out of time to verse 25. Let's start at verse 24. You shall know that your tent is in peace, and he shall visit your habitation and find nothing amiss. In other words, God's going to bless you richly if you turn back to him. And verse 25, you shall know that your descendants shall be many, and your offspring shall be like the grass of the earth. How insensitive. That may be true, but Eliphaz has no way of knowing. It was true that God would bless him with more children. But Eliphaz has no way of knowing that. And I learned from that his timing stinks. And what I mean by that, that's like standing before the casket of someone's just lost a loved one, lost their child. And you stand there at the funeral home before the casket. Well, you know, if you live right, God will bless you with more children. Well, that may be true, but this is not the time to talk about it. His friend made a lot of mistakes, and that was one of them. Be careful about your timing, is one of the things I learned. Anyway, now at verse 27, what does Eliphaz do? This is quite interesting. This is it. I close the book on the case. The discussion is over. You're a sinner. And that's basically what he says at verse 27. He says, we've searched it out and it's true. Hear it and know it for yourself. We already know you're a sinner. You just got to figure that out for yourself. And basically, we're closing the book on the case. It's over, Job. You're done. You're a sinner. How many times has somebody charged you with wrong, but they won't listen to any explanation or defense that you might have? There's no other side. There's no other interpretation. God's going to set them straight before it's over. And we'll see that. All right. Yes, ma'am. No. Yeah. Well, this is built on a lot of assumption that, and Job's going to make this point a little bit later. Let's get ahead of ourselves. Job says the problem is you're fearful for yourself. Remember that? And what he means by that is, and we do this today, when somebody has great problems in their life, we may in our mind, and we may not even say it, but we may in our mind think, they did something to cause that, and how does that help me then? Makes me feel better about myself because it ain't going to happen to me because I didn't make that mistake. And that's what Job is saying. Job is saying that y'all are trying to pin sin on me because you're afraid the same thing could happen to you if it happens to righteous people. And you don't want it to happen to you. So you want to console yourself by saying, Job had to do something wrong. Job had to do something wrong, or this would have never happened. And as long as we're living right, it'll never happen to us. And Job said, no, it could happen to you too. We're going to see that. Questions or comments?
I see that sometimes we may be guided by our own experiences without having all the facts. We might assume things based on.
And Eliphaz did that for sure. Eliphaz did that for sure. Anything else? before we close.
I think it's interesting to also look, as we were talking about the assume, but it's human nature to look for something or someone to blame. That's our nature. We sometimes just need to step back and look at everything that's going on and say, hey, maybe it's not that, it's just happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good point. One last thing, and then we'll close, and we'll be ready for chapter 6 next time. There's a danger of speaking for God when God hasn't revealed. In other words, God hadn't told them Job had sinned, but they made that assumption. And there's a danger of speaking on behalf of God when God hasn't spoken. And we often do that. Chapter 6 through 9 next time.